Hi friends, I'm Golda Rose and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be talking about my top interview tips as well as share some personal experiences I've had when interviewing for different engineering positions. This was a highly requested video along with ways to get an engineering job, so I went ahead and I decided to create a series starting with my video last week. So if you haven't already, please be sure to click the box up here and go check that video out first. And just a reminder, if you haven't already, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe because I do post videos every single week. So there are a few things I want to mention before we hop into this video. One is I am not a hiring manager, so I cannot help you get a job. 2, I'm not an expert in helping people find jobs in the United States. 3, I am in the United States, so all of my personal experiences that I'll be talking about throughout this video and my personal tips are focused on what I've experienced here. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the videos. I do hope that the content in this video applies to a large majority of you, and please feel free to comment down below if you have any additional questions, but I just wanted to throw that out there before we get started. So I'm going to talk about a few ways that you can prep for an interview, and this applies to both engineering as well as any other field. I feel like these are just really good tips to have when going into that interview. So you've been applying for a lot of jobs and you finally hear back about scheduling an interview. Yay, congrats. So it's probably the week before or maybe even the day before the interview and you're sitting there thinking, what do I bring? What do I wear? And trying to Google and figure out what should I do? So these are my top 7 tips for how to prep for an interview and what to do the day of. But first things first, deep breaths. So my first tip is to relax. Like I just mentioned, take some deep breaths. Go ahead and pat yourself on the back because you made it through the first stage of the interview process. My tip number 2 is to prep what you're going to wear. Ladies, what I like to wear is I like to wear a suit with a blouse or a button up and maybe some heels. Now, feel free to wear a nice dress as long as it's not, a little scandalous, then you should be good. And then you can pair a nice dress with maybe some heels or some flats, whatever you're comfortable with. And for men, you can wear a suit, a button up, maybe a tie and some nice dress shoes. You could also wear some slacks or even just a polo. I personally would rather overdress and look prepared and professional. So unless the interview tells you specifically like, hey, you can dress casual, it's always good to just be presentable and dress appropriately. And I'll go ahead and include some photos here. So women, this is some examples of what you would wear. And men, here are some examples of what you can wear. Tip number 3 is to be presentable and clean up. Obviously, you'll want to shower, of course, clean up, maybe get a haircut, whatever you want to do to feel prepared. Just keep in mind while they read your resume, they might have looked at your LinkedIn profile. They really don't know you, so that first impression is just really important. And going into the interview presentable and professional will just really show the interviewers that you're prepared and you're ready. Whether or not we want to admit it, we are judged the first time someone sees us, so first impressions will have a lasting effect. Tip number 4 is to print your resume out. Now, of course, the company has your resume, they will probably print it out, but I feel like when you go into an interview, having your resume printed out, it just shows that you're prepared and you're professional. Again, kind of going back to that thing, we want to be prepared and professional when going into an interview because that is our first impression. Now, if you don't know the number of people who will be in your interview, I'd like to just print out 10 because I feel like I've never been in an interview panel with more than 10 people for one, and it just shows that, you're prepared. If you bring 3 and there's 4 people, talk about awkward. So if you don't know, just best practices, print out 10. If you happen to know how many people are going to be in your interview, go ahead and print maybe 1 or 2 additional copies just in case extra people end up coming in last minute. Tip number 5 is to have some type of padfolio or notebook and a couple of pens with you. I'll go ahead and put a picture of padfolio right here. And then just to describe it, it's usually like a leather or maybe like a faux leather folder. I believe they also have some that are more like a binder or like a plastic material. And then you could always bring a notepad. Usually padfolios will have some type of notepad in them, as well as additional pockets for your business card or your resumes. And that's one reason I like to bring a padfolio with me, is because this is one way to keep your resumes that you printed out for the interviewers all in a nice area. Tip number 6 is to give yourself plenty of time. So whether you're driving or traveling to an interview location, you have a scheduled call, or you're doing more of a virtual interview, it's always good to give yourself some extra time just in case there's an issue with your technology or there's, some traffic that you weren't expecting. Now, if you're traveling to a location where you have to drive or maybe take a train, I personally like to get there around 30 minutes early and then walk into the location about 10 to 15 minutes before my scheduled interview time. Planning to get there early is just to account for, maybe there's an accident, maybe there's some extra traffic. You never know what could go wrong. And just like Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So I just like to be really prepared. And the last tip number 7, is to get there early. So getting there early, again, goes back to that first impression. Sometimes companies will have you fill out additional forms. Maybe you have to get through security. Maybe there's no parking. You never know. So it's best just to arrive early. Like I said, I like to plan for 30 minutes and walk in around 10 to 15 minutes before my actual interview time. It really just shows that you're punctual and professional and you're ready to go. Again, making that great first impression really will aid in your interview process. Another thing about getting there early, it shows that you value the time of the interviewers. The worst thing to do is to arrive right on time, find out, there's no parking, or find out that you have to do this additional thing through security or fill out another form, and you're there losing time on your interview. Okay, so jumping into some typical interview questions. So I'm going to start with some more general questions, and then I'm going to move into more engineering focused interview questions. So a top question that I feel like I've probably been asked in every interview is, tell us about yourself. So this is a perfect time to have your elevator speech or your elevator pitch, talking about yourself, where you went to school. If you have a job, briefly mention that. I'm sure they will ask you more questions about that later in the interview, but just talk a little bit about your passions. You don't want to go minutes and minutes into answering this question. I would usually stick to maybe 30 seconds to a minute in answering the tell us about yourself question. So another popular question is, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Again, I feel like I've been asked this at every interview, and it's a great time to highlight yourself and highlight ways that you've overcome challenges. Another question that can be asked is where you see yourself in 5 years, or what's your greatest accomplishment. Things like that are very general, and then they'll move into more of the position-focused questions. The general questions are just a way that the company and the interviewers can get to know you a little bit more, and it's almost treated as like an icebreaker, because as you're going into that interview, you're probably kind of nervous, and then that's kind of just talking about yourself, getting to know the room, and all of that. Moving on to some more engineering-focused questions. Now, keep in mind, depending on what position you're going for, depending on what area of engineering you're in, if it's mechanical, electrical, chemical, these questions will vary and they will be more specific. So just keep that in mind. When I mention X company or X software, that's just a general example. Fill in the blank for the X's, so just keep that in mind. So a popular question I feel like for engineering is, describe the most challenging engineering project you've had. It could be a school project, it could be a lab. If you have work experiences, it could be talking about the company you've worked with and an engineering challenge that you've had to overcome. So a good general way of answering questions for an interview is called the STAR method. S stands for situation, T stands for task, A stands for action, and R stands for result. So as we're going through these interview questions, and specifically the engineering ones, keep this in mind. Now, you don't have to say, well, I'm gonna do the STAR method. You don't have to say things like that. As long as you keep it professional and you cover, parts of this method, I feel like that is sufficient. You never wanna sit there and say, so my S would be this. Don't do that. Another popular engineering question is, how do you work in a team environment? So typically in an engineering environment, working with an engineering team and at a company in general, you're going to be interfacing with a lot of different people, probably in a lot of different fields. So just keep that in mind. You want to think about an example where maybe for your senior design project, you've had to work with electrical engineers and you're a chemical engineer or you're a mechanical engineer, as long as you kind of tie that together. Or maybe for a job you're working at, you've had to work with a whole bunch of different engineers, or maybe techs, or maybe marketing and finance. So just keep that in mind. I just want an example to see how you are in a team environment. If you're not really a team person, go ahead and mention that as well. That's totally up to you. But just keep in mind, usually engineering jobs, you're going to be working with a lot of different people or maybe different departments. Another one is, tell us about your favorite engineering project. So again, expand on that however you want. It could be in school, it could be at work, it could be something that you've done on your own. If you like restoring cars, talk about that. If you like working on different home projects, talk about that. Whatever your favorite engineering project is, go ahead and expand upon that. And I feel like when people talk about something that they're passionate about, you could just see it in their face that they're excited. So that's just one way to really let the interviews know you and know about you. Another typical thing I found during interviews is that an interviewer will say, so I see you know, let's say X software. Could you give me an example of when you use this software? So for during interviews for me, I've had people say, oh, so you know SolidWorks. Can you give me an example of what project you use or what type of, have you done assemblies, or just kind of go into a little bit of detail just so they can gauge how well you actually know the software. Another typical question is, why are you interested in working for X company? Why are you interested in working in defense, or why are you interested in the medical device industry? Certain questions like that, just so they can gauge how passionate you are about what the company does. Another question I've been asked is, tell us about a time where a project didn't go as planned. How did you adapt to that, or what did you do? There are some companies that might ask you what your salary expectations are. If an interviewer does not ask you, I do not suggest talking about salary during your first interview. Salary discussion is once they've offered you the job. Maybe they gave you a little less than what you were expecting. Maybe there was a range on the position description and you're at the lower range and you thought, well, I kind of want it to be in the middle. You can have a salary discussion after the fact. I usually don't suggest bringing up salary during the first interview, but please, go about it how you want. This is just my personal opinion, and these are things that I've experienced, so just keep that in mind. Another couple questions that I've been asked is, tell us about a time where you received negative feedback. How did you react? One very specific question was, what are the 3 laws of thermodynamics? And I was there like, I haven't taken thermodynamics in 2 years. I don't know what the laws are. So a tip for you guys is, let's say you're asked a very technical question. Now, I've only been asked like a technical question like that during one interview, and I went on a lot of interviews throughout undergrad. So this is just one example of how I personally handled that situation. So the interviewers asked, oh, what are the 3 laws of thermodynamics? I was just like, stuck. I hadn't been asked a very technical question like that, and I also hadn't taken, like I mentioned, thermodynamics in a couple of years. So I was there like, I don't know, and it just threw me off. So they were like, well, we can come back to that, and I was like, yeah, let's please come back to that. I ended up at the interview, because I didn't remember, I ended up coming back to that question and said, I want to touch on this question a little bit more. And they were like, oh, do you remember the laws? And I was just like, I don't, but I know that I've developed my problem solving skills. I know that if I did need those rules, or I did need those laws, that I could go to a senior engineer or maybe a peer in the company, and I could ask them, or I could look it up, or I could find it in a textbook or online. So things like that, showing that you have those problem solving skills. Even if you might not know something right away, during the course of undergrad and during the course of your education, you're going to be taking a lot of classes. It's not expected to know every single thing from every single class when you graduate. It shows that, you have a general knowledge of some field of engineering or some field, and that you can apply this way of thinking. You can apply these concepts, but by no means are you expected to know every little thing from every single class. So I just want to throw that out there. Now, I did get a score on that interview. I got a 95 out of 100. I was offered different positions within the company, and then I ended up taking a position elsewhere. But I just want to show you that even though I had that, answer, I don't know if that was where I lost 5 points, but even at that 95, I still got an A on the interview, and that was another different thing. I've never been graded on an interview, but just keeping that in mind. It's possible to not know something, but turn it into a positive. So I just want to throw that out there and give my example of how I had to, kind of wing it. So this next portion is, during the interview, once you've answered all the questions and the interviewers are done with their questions, typically you'll be asked like, oh, do you have any questions for us? I personally like to ask just 2 questions. One question I really like to ask is, how would you describe the culture of the company and the culture within the team? So when you're applying for positions, and let's say you have your interview, there's usually a specific team you'll be in. You know the general company that you're interviewing for. So I like to ask that, because I feel like that's a good way to gauge, 1, how the people in the room feel about the company. And that kind of tells you, well, do I really want to work for this company? And 2, it just shows that you're interested in making a connection within the company. Now these are just my personal opinions, and these are why I like to ask these questions. And then another thing, and something that's really important for me when looking at jobs, is are there options for professional development within the company? This could be, do they pay for grad school? Are there professional leadership programs within the company? Do they offer certificates, or will they pay for certificates? And other things like that, because for me personally, it's always been a goal never to be stagnant in a certain company. And I feel like having those options to grow and to develop, and maybe there's a mentoring or a rotation program there. Those are really good options just to, grow as an engineer, grow as a professional in the workforce. So you end the interview, you've answered all the questions, you've asked your questions, and they say goodbye, you give a firm handshake, and then you leave, and you're stuck there wondering, what do I do now? How do I follow up? So a few of my follow-up tips are to follow up in maybe 24 hours to 1 business day. So if you have an interview on a Friday, follow up that Monday. If you have an interview on Thursday, follow up Friday. Like I said, 1 business day or 24 hours after is just, I feel like, a good rule of thumb. Send an email on the same thread that you last communicated on, just thanking them for the opportunity to interview. If you want a job, if you are still interested in a job after the interview, say that you're excited about the opportunities. It was great to meet everyone, and thank them for their time. But one thing I like to remind people is to be patient. Now, you follow up, and let's say you don't hear. Don't go sending another email saying, well, why didn't you respond? Don't be impatient, because you have to keep in mind, you're not the only person who's interviewing for this position. I know it's hard to imagine, because maybe you really, really, really want that position, but there are other people who are interviewing as well. There are other people who the interviews will be talking to and reaching out to. So just keep that in mind, be patient. I like to, if by chance I don't hear back in a week after I send my follow-up, then I will send another follow-up. And if I don't hear anything back, then I kind of just abandon it and move on. Now, you can be very persistent if that's like your dream company and you're like, I just want a chance. You can be the squeaky wheel. You can continue to, be persistent and reach out to them, but that is totally up to you. Just remember to maintain professionalism. That's really important. They might get a little annoyed with you and like, oh, okay, well, you know what? I have this other position. Let's see if they would fit in. There are definitely chances of that happening. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of going through this process, doing the follow-ups, doing the interviews, and all of that. A question that a few people asked in the comment section of one of my other videos was, when did I hear back about jobs? So my answer to that is just, it really depends on the job and it depends on the company. Now, if I applied, let's say on an online portal for, I don't know, some big company, I probably never heard back, which sucks, but it's fine. Just to give some examples. So there are the extremes. There's the extreme of, my first job, I had the interview on the spot at the career fair. 2 weeks later, I went to the job interview at the location and I got the job on the spot. I was given a tentative offer letter saying, hey, we'd like to have you on the team. These are the steps that we would take, and then let's move forward. Now, there are other times where, I've applied to some online portal. I'm really hopeful about getting the position, and then I never hear back about anything. Somehow I got lost in all of the millions of people who are also applying. So there's the extremes, the day of or never, to be honest. Now, I feel like typically, depending on how many people they're interviewing, it could take a couple weeks to hear back. So this is of course assuming after you've had your interview. It depends. That's really hard to say. There are a few instances, let's say some of my friends had 2 interviews. They took one job with another company and didn't hear back from the other job until months later, and that's the job they wanted. So it really just depends. Some companies are slower, some companies may not have the need but are interviewing and then they're just waiting. So like I mentioned, it just depends. I wish I had like a firm answer for you guys, but just be patient. Just keep your options open. You never know what could happen. And then a big question that you guys had was like, how much do you make, or what are salary expectations? I'm just gonna keep it very general. So I'm not going to be talking about my salary on here. So moving on to salary expectations. salary really depends. You know, it's kind of one of those tough things to say. Before this video, I did just look up what the average salary of a mechanical engineer in the United States is. The annual salary is about $72,000. That's US dollars a year. There are companies that pay you more, there are companies that pay you less. It really just depends, and it depends on your experience and what the company can support and what your role will be. There are so many different things. I couldn't tell you, oh, you know, when you graduate, you should be making this. Like, I can't tell you that. So again, it really depends on a few things, and I wish we could have, you know, a set rate and a set this, but there are just too many factors and too many variables, let's say. You know, you have the company size, the position, what your roles and responsibilities will be, what their budget is, how much they can support, your years of experience, let's say your GPA, whatever it is, your location. Location has a lot to do with it. So there's just too many factors to really say, but again, I encourage you to continue looking at the averages in your area. Like I mentioned, the average for a mechanical engineer in the United States is around 72,000 US dollars. So that's just to put something in perspective. And again, companies can offer you more, companies can offer you less. It's up to you to, you know, go in with those realistic expectations and figure out what salary works best for you. It's okay to turn people down because they offer you too little, and it's okay to wait for the right job. So whatever works for you at the end of the day, it's your career, it's what you're doing, it's where you want to be. So it's not up to me. And so I'm just here to offer some advice as well as share my personal experiences. So that kind of wraps up today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. As always, I enjoy interacting with you. So if you have any additional questions or maybe some personal questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below. I will try and respond back to everyone. Just give me a little time and then we'll go from there. So if you haven't already, this is just a reminder to give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you really, really like the video, go ahead and hit that notification bell because I do post videos every single week. So I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.